بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Welcome. We'd like to welcome everyone to our final talk of Islam Awareness Week with the topic Shari'ah law, is it the best solution for all mankind? Our speaker today is Abdullah Al-Andalusi. Abdullah is a former Christian who embraced Islam at a young age of 18, and at a young age, sorry, was it 18?
Yeah, or 14.
14, and has studied Islam in depth since the age of 18. That's what I meant to say. Abdullah has had a long experience in working for Islamic intellectual revival in the Muslim community and in improving the understanding of Islam to non-Muslim communities in the UK. His activities involve speaking at community centres, universities, colleges, and appearances on various TV programs. He has also spoken at public debates and has debated extensively with atheists, secularists, and Christians on a variety of different platforms, including public TV and radio. So, with no further ado, I'll pass over to Abdullah Al-Andalusi.
Well, greetings and assalamu alaikum, and thanks to everyone attending and the Islamic Society for kindly inviting me to give a talk on a very controversial, no doubt, topic, especially in today's world, but also a very interesting topic. Very interesting because there is a very fascinating aspect with thinking outside the box coming today. We live in a society and in a kind of paradigm worldview, which assumes that there's a kind of end to history. So there's been a certain progression throughout history through some Stone Ages and Dark Ages, which that's debatable whether it was dark or not, depending on which point of the earth you were living on. But anyway, Dark Ages, Middle Ages, and so on. And then there's this Enlightenment, and suddenly now history ends with some utopic existence of scientific progression and enlightened thought, where eventually we might become disembodied beings who discard our material forms, and who knows what science fiction can produce next. But what if we do not live in the utopia which our predecessors thought we would live in? What if that we've actually conjured for ourselves different forms of oppression or different forms of injustice, many problems in the world today which never existed before? What if human beings weren't meant to live in the way that they're seeing around the world in different countries? And this is what today's topic is going to challenge. Is the economic system of free market a just and fair system? Does it produce goods and resources for all mankind in a fair way? Is the kind of social system which gives an unrestricted freedom to individuals to essentially be free from responsibility to other human beings and think about themselves as the most primary goal of their life? Is that the better system, the most enlightened system for mankind, or the most natural system? Now, the issue of Sharia is the best solution for mankind. It's a very interesting question. What is Sharia? People talk about it a lot. The word is mentioned in the media a lot. Sometimes it's mispronounced, like Shariah, according to the head of the EDL, which is promoted by Inams. I don't know who they are. But Sharia simply means, in the Arabic etymology, a way. It's a path to water, if you want to look at the kind of Arabic, speaking of the Bedouins, a path to water. And in this sense, it means a law, a way, a system that's mandated by God to bring mankind to a kind of salvation, not just a spiritual salvation in hereafter, but also a peaceful kind of salvation in this life. So the Sharia is not an old otherworldly system whereby you must endure suffering and hardship and oppression in this life, but in the next life, then you'll get all your promised just rewards. No, we aim to create a system of peace and tranquility and compassion in this life, in this world. We're very much this worldly as well as next worldly. Now, some people might say, well, that's very good, it's good that you're not only focusing on the other world and you just, forget your portion of this life and to create justice in this life, but also that's also one of the very characteristics of Sharia that gets the most criticism. is that, oh, Sharia is not like other religions. Other religions don't talk about politics, but the problem with Islam or Sharia is that it talks about politics and it gets involved, and we don't want religion involved in politics. We want to keep religion outside of politics because, quote unquote, religion causes wars. So I guess the whole of the 20th century never happened then, in terms of conflict and all those trials and problems that we saw happening throughout Europe, indeed. But first things first, let's discuss, in terms of solution, what is the best intellectual basis to have any solution for mankind? Where should we base our thoughts, or what should we base our thoughts on? Let's consider first secularism. Secularism says that religion should be separate from life, or the church separate from state, depending on which version you read. Okay, that sounds fair enough, but what is it really saying? It's essentially saying that whatever a human being's purpose in life, whatever man's purpose in life, whatever thing that created man, or whatever cosmic natural process that created man, the very reason that human beings exist in the first place, has nothing to do with our life. So our purpose in life, whatever that might be, or whatever mechanism created us, whether it's dialectical materialism if you're a communist, whatever process it is, has nothing to do with your life, nothing to do with the life you're living. It is completely irrational system. Yet it is advocated. And to be fair, do you know why it's advocated? Do you know why the people who advocate secularism do advocate this? It's because they've had a bad experience, a really bad experience in their history. And it's only for European history. Nowhere else in the world do they have the same kind of situation. In European history, you had this oppressive church-based, so to speak, supported state, or states rather. And the kings used to say that you have to tolerate our oppressive rule because, God wills it, or what have you. That this is the will of God, you must tolerate this. And so people got so sick and tired of these corrupt dictators that they blamed the institution, which was the church, and ergo religion, because religion must be the cause of our oppression. Where no, it never was actually. In fact, religion was used by secular powers, the kings, to justify their existence. Nothing more. And that's only in Europe, only happened in Europe. And so it didn't happen anywhere else. So Europeans are traumatized by this, and so this is why they firmly insist that secularism is the way to progress. Whereas for Arabs of the 6th century, when they actually connected their purpose in life to their life's affairs, they became one of the most progressive civilizations in the world. So isn't it interesting? In one situation, they separated their religion from their public affairs, and they became progressive, but there's debate as to what was the cause of that progress. But in another situation, the Arabs discovered that it was revealed to them their purpose in life, and they connected that to their politics. They looked at their political systems and how they lived and how they interacted, and they became very advanced and progressive. So secularism is not the basis, I think, to a reactionary situation to past problems that happen only in a certain geographical location is not the basis by which we can base our solution to the world today. Liberalism, it has many names, this word. Liberalism, it could be called freedom or democracy, or it's called, or it used to be called libertarianism. It has many different incarnations. Now it's called social liberalism or neoliberalism, or there's very many different names for it. Its economic system is called capitalism, which we are most familiarly aware with. Now, the thing about liberalism is, liberalism was meant to be, was introduced by humanists after secularism was imposed, to say, well, what do we do now? Now we've taken the church out, what do we do now? And I'm not going to go into how they worked this out, but they had this idea that essentially every human being has fundamental rights. And these rights, and originally there were Christians that were formulating this, these rights are God-given, given by God, which is ironic considering that they've just implemented secularism and they're now looking for something that would go on top of that pillar of secularism, to now bring in God and God-given rights into the mixture, which is a bit of a contradiction. But they started saying that everyone has individual rights, which is intrinsic to everybody else. Alright, that's fine, and they said that the purpose of everyone's life is to pursue happiness. Merely because they said that whenever a human being does something such as obviously procreate or eat or whatever, they encounter pleasure. They encounter this phenomenal pleasure. So they made the assumption that pleasure must be the end goal of every human being, nothing more. Whereas an evolutionary biologist or any kind of biologist would say that rather the brain releases dopamine into the human system, so to speak, in order to kind of, as a reward mechanism for doing something that the human being should be doing, so to speak. So the pleasure is actually a means to an end, not the end in itself. Because you're given this pleasure when you're doing something right, so to speak. You're procreating, or you're eating, or you're surviving, or so on and so forth, or you're victorious at something you're competing at. Pleasure is given as a reward, not as the end result. But this system turned it into the end result. And now the endless pursuit of self-pleasure or interest is the basis for liberalism. This causes certain problems. As philosopher Charles Taylor said, that the very idea of starting an argument whose foundation was the rights of the individual would have been strange and puzzling. Why do we begin to find it reasonable to start a political theory with an assertion of individual rights and to give it primacy? The Professor Daniel Bell, the lecturer of political science at the University of Singapore, says that liberalism, it is claimed, contributes to, or at least does not sufficiently take account of, the negative social and psychological effects related to the atomistic tendencies of modern liberal societies. This is undoubtedly a worrying trend in contemporary society towards a callous individualism that ignores community and social obligations, and liberal theory does not seem up to the task of dealing with this problem. Essentially, if I tell everyone that your main goal in life is to basically focus on yourself and to attain your pleasure for yourself, what is your motivation for helping anyone else? Apart from, unless it is in your self-interest. Now, interestingly enough, even humouring liberalism, say we all have our rights, that's fine, I recognise your right to live or what have you. Say if someone comes into and threatens your life and tries to attack you, and you say, oh, come save me, it's my right to live. I say, well, I recognise your right to live, good luck, mate. You wouldn't, when you say, but don't you have a duty? I say, but I don't have a duty, because my purpose of life is to focus on why should I risk myself? I'm focusing on my pleasure, right? My own interests. It might not be beneficial towards me to do so. Yeah? And in most cases, it's not. And you can see that the entire system, especially the foreign policy of the Western countries, is based around only being moral when it's convenient. And when they are immoral, they say it's a necessary evil. Although lesser of two evils is a very common remark they use, a euphemism they use. Whereas Islam starts completely different basis. Islam says, rather the Quran says from Surah 4, verse 1, O mankind, remain conscious of the duty to your Lord, who created you of a single soul, and of like nature created its mate, and from the pair of them created and spread many men and women. So it said, remain conscious of your duty. And of course, as was up on the screen there before the guy took it off, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, I have not created mankind or jinn except to worship me. So we start off with the premise of duty. Because if I believe that I have a duty to protect you, then if someone threatens you, I have to risk my life to protect you, even if it's not beneficial to me. And I always give this analogy, which I call the story of Chinese heaven and Chinese hell. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's actually, I think, Thai heaven and Thai hell, but people just call it the story of Chinese heaven and Chinese hell. And in this story, it is a person that asks a monk, it says, tell me what's in hell, what's in hell. Tell me what's in hell. And so this monk explains that in hell, everyone sits around a table, and there's lots of food, big bowls of food on this table, and everyone has these meter-long chopsticks. And you're not allowed to not use these chopsticks. You can only eat using these chopsticks. If you try not to, the food will disappear. So you have to use these chopsticks. But people try and eat, but they can't because it's too long. It's too long to get to their mouths. So everyone's hungry, everyone's miserable in hell. I said, oh, okay. So said the questioner, so tell me what's in Chinese heaven. Or rather, they didn't say Chinese heaven, what's in heaven. And the monk said that in heaven, it's exactly the same. And then the guy was really perplexed, saying that, well, why is it not different then? Isn't it meant to be heaven, right? And the monk said, yes, but in heaven, the people feed each other. See, they feed the person opposite. And this is the example of Islam. Islam doesn't focus on you only focus on your interest first. It says you have interests that you must fulfill as a human being, and that's fine. You should seek your interests. You shouldn't be completely selfless. You should have some self-respect. However, that is as equal worth as other people as well. Other people also have a right over you. And this is what we call a duties-first system, or duty-based system. Communism also has a duty-based system, but unfortunately it has no reason to have a duty. So it says that we all must work for the greater good, we all must work for the greater whole, but because sacrificing yourself, and communism does also believe that the purpose of life is to seek pleasure as well. But how can you justify to a communist sacrificing his life just to decrease the price of potatoes by 1 penny or so, 2 rubles or whatever? Doesn't work. You can't persuade a communist now to give his life up for a greater good, which doesn't, he'll never actually see in his lifetime. And so communists used more coercive measures during the Soviet era, such as commissars and pistols. A very persuasive argument. And this was the problem. And that was the problem, that you can't persuade a materialist that it's in their better interest to sacrifice their life or to give up of themselves for others. Whereas in Islam, there's always a promised reward in the next life as well. And that's what makes the system work. Now, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, this is the last point I want to mention about the intellectual basis. He said, when describing about society, he said society is like people taking lots to go on a ship. Some are on the top deck, some are on the bottom deck. And when anyone wants water, they have to take water from the side of the ship. But what if those in the bottom said one day that let us not trouble those in the top and make a small hole in our part of the ship to get water directly without troubling those on the top? If those on the top let them drill a hole for their part of the ship, all would be drowned, all would be destroyed. But if those at the top prevented them from drilling that hole, then all would be saved. So in Islam, it is not about the society and forget the individual like communism. And it's not about the individual but forget society like is liberalism or capitalism. Islam is the individual and society of equal consideration. And this is the main difference, the fundamental difference between Islam or Sharia and any other system. Now, so who's taking the time, though? I don't want to speak over my time and put everyone to sleep.
No, you still got about half an hour.
Sure. All right. Give me like a 15-minute warning.
Right.
And so, okay. Now, getting to more meat, the kind of meat of the argument. Social system. How does Islam organize society? How does liberalism organize society? And I won't talk too much about communism because it's not really discussed much these days anymore. But let's look at a liberal society. Let's look at America. America has been, I guess, lauded by many social scientists around the world as the most individualistic and perhaps the most closest to what you might see a purely liberal society. Britain, not so much, because of the works of Edmund Burke, which is a different discussion altogether, a bit more depth as to, they had some more conservative elements, preserving the more kind of Christian ethics of the past, whereas in America it was more progressive, it was more a pure system, and France very much the same. In the US, for example, it is estimated that out of a population of 300 million people, 3.6 million children are accepted by state and local child protection services as alleged victims of child maltreatment for investigation or assessment. That's 3.6 million children. That's out of every 100 Americans, there'll be one child who will be taken into state care because of excessive abuse and mistreatment. In the UK, 167 women are raped every day in the UK. 1 in 4 women are beaten in domestic violence. In the US, a woman is raped every 6 minutes and battered every 15 seconds. I could go on. There's 47,000 rapes occurring in the UK every single year. And there are over 2 million violent incidents in just 1 year in England and Wales, according to, I think, police figures. Now, upon this, one of the judges, a British judge called Mr. Justice Coleridge, said, he's a family division judge for England and Wales, he said that, commenting on the social and family breakdown happening in the West, he said, it is a never-ending carnival of human misery, a ceaseless river of human distress. And why is that? It is because in liberalism, again, people focus on their own interests. And it's made the average, well, not maybe necessarily every single person, but a lot of people very scared of commitment or responsibility in different forms. Everyone's scared of being responsible. You feel pressured, you feel suffocated. And this is what is created in this. And in many cases, it's caused a lot of problems, such as, children out, single-parent families, children outside of wedlock. It got so bad that UK had to implement an anti-liberal law, which is child support law, that the man must contribute some money towards the child which he produced with a woman outside wedlock. He must contribute. This is not, according to liberalism, this is a bad law, because you can't impose on anyone something that was done out of choice, right? Yeah, I mean, this is, why should he? It's not, the baby does not have a right upon him. The baby can be looked after by the mother or the state, right? But it got so bad that they had to impose this, which is essentially an anti-liberal law. Or the smoking ban, because the NHS was overburdened with people from passive smoking and smoking. The smoking ban in public places. These are anti-liberal laws. These are against liberalism. And they realize that liberalism is the cause of this, because people have, if you are just focusing on your own self-interest to an unlimited extent, then it doesn't matter what problems you cause. And secondly, if your purpose of your life is to enjoy yourself, and someone depends on you, and is always asking for your time that you could better spend doing whatever you want, then isn't that a problem, to be responsible for someone, to take care of someone always on you all the time to help them out or something? It's a problem. And they've observed that with men in this society. Men don't want to get into relationships. They want to be single and be free to do whatever they want. And so they had to implement these laws in this country. Whereas in Islam, the Quran commands us that, O you who believe, stand firmly for God as witnesses to fair dealing, and let not hatred of others make you depart from doing justice. And again it says, O you who believe, stand firmly for justice as witnesses to God against yourselves, your parents, your kith, and your kin. Now, justice in Islam doesn't necessarily mean that you're judging someone or you're trying to arbitrate a case. No, justice also means that you give and fulfill people's rights as well. So in Islam, for example, in many Islamic sources, for example, a woman would go to the Prophet Muhammad and said that my husband is not doing justice to me, which means he's not fulfilling her rights over him. And in Islam, we have to fulfill the rights of people over us. Very famously, the issue of neighbours. The neighbour has a right over his other neighbour. And according to the narration of Prophet Muhammad, anyone who goes to sleep full while his neighbour is hungry has no faith. So we have to be, in fact, in another narration, he said that the angel Gabriel revealed to the Prophet Muhammad all the rights of neighbours, and it was so much that he thought that the neighbour could also has the right of inheritance for your property if you pass away. He thought it was going to go that far. That's how much rights the neighbour has. But in a lot of our societies, we don't even hardly talk to our neighbours. It's almost seen as, maybe hi, bye, how you doing? But nothing more than that. Not like, is your family okay? Do you have enough food, or is there any issues I can help you out with? No one proactively helps. In some cases there are people that have this ethic, but in a lot of cases, increasingly, it's very much the opposite. Also, mutual respect. This is very interesting, because according to liberalism, you have the right to, obviously, live your life and do whatever you want, but you don't have the right to respect in this country, or any country. There's no such thing as you must be respected, or people cannot insult you, or spread slander about you, and so on. Unless, of course, it affects your job, and they allow this little caveat called libel, which you can only get justice for yourself if you have a minimum of £50,000 to pay for court charges to launch this. So only celebrities and newspapers and whoever get to use the libel laws. You can't. So if the newspaper slanders your reputation, you can't do nothing about it, because at the end of the day, money talks, and they've got more money than you do. Which is interesting, we all have free speech, but they have more ability to speak because they own press platforms, media, TV, newspaper, what have you. So being equal under the law doesn't necessarily mean that you are actually equal, because the media has more power than you, or a newspaper, or let's say Rupert Murdoch has certainly more speech than you, essentially. He's the owner of many newspapers, if you didn't know who he is. In Islam, in the Surah 49, Ayah 11, it says, O you who believe, let not people ridicule another, for they may be better than them. Nor shall any women ridicule other women, for they may be better than them. Nor shall you mock one another, or call each other by names. Evil indeed is the reversion to wickedness after attaining acknowledgement. Anyone who does not repent, these are the transgressors. So in Islam, we have an obligation. The Sharia obliges everyone to respect your fellow human being. In fact, respect is an issue more important than preserving someone's life, because if someone is oppressed or humiliated, this is a worse situation than if they were killed, because they are living in a situation of misery and sadness, whereas if a person dies, then his misery ends there and then. So in the Quran it says that oppression is worse than killing. So oppressing someone is worse than killing them. And this is why Islam fights against oppression so vehemently. Because why do wars start? Why do wars of resistance start against oppressive or occupying colonial regimes? Why? Because people can't live under humiliation or oppression. A lot of people will be prepared to give their lives to end their oppression and end their humiliation. So the Quran is making a judgment which it bears witness by human nature itself. And in Libya, currently happening now, what are the people doing? People are braving death by a dictator because they prefer to live with respect and out of escape humiliation, escape oppression, then rather lose their life. So they don't care about their life as long as whatever they do, they can live and die free and with respect. So this is something which the Quran bears testimony to. Now, in terms of the fundamental unit of a society, what is the fundamental unit of a society? Because if we're going to organize society in the best way, what do we judge is the fundamental unit? In liberalism, it's the individual. So the smallest unit in any society is the individual. And as it goes, as the assumption goes, that if you deal with the rights of the individual, then by default, society is taken care of. You don't need to deal with society. Society is taken care of. As long as everyone has their rights, then there'll be no problems in society. In communism, the smallest unit is society, and there's also such thing as the individual. So you're all kind of like spokes in the wheel. You have no choice. And the way they justify it is that you were born into a certain economic condition that you had no control over. Ergo, you are a product of society, and therefore society is the biggest consideration, not you as an individual. And of course, communism suppresses the individual's rights in lieu of society. But what does Islam say? Islam says that the smallest, or rather you could say the most important or fundamental unit of society is the family, or you could say human reproductive unit. Why? Why does it say that? It says it because the family is the basis for the nurturing of human beings, bringing them into existence. It is the basis of where you first get educated, you're first taught about values of human empathy as well by your parents. You need this to actually function. And it's the first nurturing environment you go to. If you don't have any money, for ages past, you didn't go to the social welfare services, you went to your family, because your family is meant to support you. And that's how all human organizations have always been since time immemorial. Now, here's a misunderstood aspect of Sharia, which is men and women's roles. It's very misunderstood. And it's misunderstood because in the West, they think that if the law is not absolutely equal for everybody, then there is a fundamental inequality there. Whereas in Islam, it doesn't look at, the issue is not about equality, the issue is about functionality and organization. That's all, nothing to do with equality, and I'll prove this. Surah 3, Ayah 195 says, Allah is saying to the Muslims, I do not waste the deed of any doer among you, any male or female. The one of you is as the other. So, and that was one of many verses talking about male-female equality in the eyes of God. We have fundamental equality. However, we're not identical. So a woman can give birth to a child. A man can't. That's biology. Men are generally, due to testosterone from a younger age, they have more upper body strength and are bigger and taller in general. This is biology. It's not Islam. This is a simple biological fact. So what Islam does, and this is a running theme through every aspect of Islam, is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives someone of some blessing or strength or ability, then they have a responsibility to use this blessing, strength, or ability, either be wealth, intelligence, or physical strength, to protect those that don't, to, in effect, help those people who don't have this. And this is proven in Surah 4, Ayah 37, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, men are the protectors and maintainers of women. And it says not because they're higher in status than women. No, was it say because Allah has given one more strength than the other, and because they support them from their means. So in Islam, it's just a biological fact. What's the most efficient way of organizing a family? One, the man who is more physically stronger, he is responsible for the protection and welfare and safety of that family. And the woman is responsible for helping to be nurturing the next generation of humanity, which is the future of humanity, the most important job. The woman is the heart of the family, and so on. So this is how it's just an organization. It's got nothing to do with differences of status, but it's misunderstood in the West. And this has caused so much problems. As Professor Douglas Basharo of the University of Maryland says, overall, what I see in which people, especially children, will be more isolated because not only will their parents both be working, but they will have fewer siblings, fewer cousins, fewer aunts and uncles. So over time, we're moving towards a more individualistic society. Now, if someone said that women can't work, because the Prophet's wife, Khadija, radhiyallahu anha, she was a very successful businesswoman. But what it's saying is that Islam expects the man to protect his wife and to provide for her, so that she does not need to work. She can just, enjoy the protection, and she doesn't need to think about where am I going to provide for myself, because she'll be provided for by the husband. She can work if she wants to, and that will be discussion between her and the husband. But that's an option, but she doesn't have to. For a man, he has no choice. There's no choice. He has to provide for his wife, even if his wife is richer than him, and he's poor, and he only has the bare essentials, he still has to, as an obligation. He can't get out of that. Now, I think the best way to explain it, and this is going to the next verse, Surah 2, verse 228, and women shall have similar rights against them, referring to men, according to what is equitable, but men have a degree of responsibility over them, and Allah is exalted in power and wise. Now people say, why is it that Islam gives men a kind of responsible role, and why not the woman can have a responsible role in the family? Is it because they say that women have a lesser intellect? I say, well, we don't say that. There's no Islamic source ever that says that women are not as intelligent as men. Nowhere says this. In fact, from a lot of Islamic sources, a lot of women have actually bested many of the companions of Prophet Muhammad through giving an idea that was better than theirs, and so on. So, and that's many, many examples, and so on. So this is what Islam is trying to say, is that it's like this. You see these celebrities, and these celebrities, obviously, they're very famous people. They obviously do their music, or they do their films, and so on. And they're always surrounded by a security entourage, right? And you think that okay, the celebrity, this is their entourage of security. These are controlled by the celebrity. But when you look at it, you see the security entourage saying that, don't go down here. This is dangerous. We got reports that there might be some dangers here. There's some fans waiting for you to ambush you here. Don't go down here. Come with me. I'll take you here. And the celebrity has to follow her own security, who she pays or he pays, and so on. Why is that? Because security knows better. Because that's their job, right? The job of security is to know better about what is the best and most secure environment. So, but would you say now the security is now leading the celebrities as slaves to their security, entourage? No, it's just how they've organized the roles. In fact, it's the security entourage which are being paid by the celebrity. And this is how Islam organizes men and women. Man is essentially the security entourage of the woman, and the woman is the heart of the family. And the Prophet Muhammad said, and to emphasize this, he said, when a man approached him and said, who should I respect the most out of my parents? And the Prophet Muhammad said that, your mother. And then he goes, and then who? And then he goes, your mother. And then who? The guy asked. A third time, the Prophet Muhammad responded, your mother. And then the guy continued, and then who? And then the Prophet said, and then your father. After giving 3 answers of the mother, then it's the father. So this is the role that women are viewed as. It's a very exalted role, a very exalted view, because they give birth to the future of mankind. Whereas all we do as men is just make sure they're comfortable. I can sense a lot of women are going to use that against their men today. Make me comfortable. So in essence, this is what Islam, how it organizes, and it's just purely an organization. That's all it is. This also creates a harmony because there's no squabbling over roles. So the man is not going to say to the woman, why don't you do this? And the woman say, why don't you do that? And so because it's understood from the get-go. And there's other things. The woman doesn't have to obey the man and everything. If the woman is overburdened with work, she says, well, you have to give me, either you help me out or you pay a maid for me, and that's her right to ask this, for example. The Prophet Muhammad himself helped out with the housework in his own house. And he sewed his own buttons, and he was a very self-sufficient guy, if you actually have a look at it. And the women actually in his household mostly focused on looking after the kids and so on, if you actually look at and even he also looked after his kids as well. He spent a lot of time, even though he was the leader of a state. So he fit all that in his busy schedule. So for men, that's a lot of stuff on our plate, if we're as Muslim men, that we have to do as to be head of the family and try to lead responsibly. Now, and you can ask me a question about that, about how there's the accountability and how that works, and so on, how you can make sure that the man does not over abuse his power. Now, the nurturing environment of the family is not just like, well, women must reproduce and men must just be secure, and it's just a very kind of regimented way, and it's all kind of cold and unfeeling. No. In Surah 30, Ayah 21, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and among his signs that he created from you wives from amongst yourselves, that you may find repose in them, and he put between you affection and mercy. So it is stating what this relationship should look like. You should have affection between the husband and wife, and mercy. What is mercy? It is forgiveness for your faults. Not harshness, not beating, not this, it's forgiveness. Does this situation exist in the West? Well, in the West there is no defined system, it's haphazard. And you lead to many arguments, whereas the male and female roles aren't fully understood. What does it mean to be a man? Psychologists are debating as to what is the female gender role, what is the male gender role now. Now it's all up in the air. And now there's a lot of turbulence in marriage because no one knows who's meant to be doing what. And each one wants to do as less as possible and do their own thing as possible. It's almost like they're just living together in the same house, like some kind of hotel occupants. Occasionally, they cook, and occasionally there is some physical interactions. So, and apart from that, this is all there is for their relationship over time, and this is very sad. So, how am I doing for time?
Another 15 minutes if you like it.
Sure. All right. I'll stop when I see people start falling asleep. So, another system that Islam, and I only picked a few because Shariah is a very big topic, it's an extremely large topic, and I could go through each aspect and look at what psychologists have said and see how it matches human nature. But I'm going to discuss a very big aspect of it, the economic system of Islam, because the discussion is that Islam is what is the best solution, is it the best solution? And one of the main aspects of the world today, especially in the materialistic modern world, is economics. So what does Islamic economics say? Well, firstly, what do we know about Western economic system? The Western economic system, essentially, to give you a small summary, views the situation like this. Does anyone do economics first? Does anyone? You? Second person there. Doesn't seem too happy about it. Alright. In economics, there's an understanding called the human economic problem. And that is that there's infinite wants from human being and limited resources. So the way to solve this problem is as much production as possible. As much production as possible, and hopefully through what's called the trickle-down effect, where things will trickle down eventually in some kind of pyramid structure, that everyone will get resources sufficient to satisfy themselves. But what happens in reality? Those at the top of this pyramid who have the larger buying power can buy even more resources and have even more wealth, and their wealth increases exponentially, that they can buy even more resources, and only a little bit trickles down. And using the most conservative estimate, and I always try to use the most conservative one, it is said that the 7% of the world's population owns 70% of the world's wealth, and that's a conservative estimate. I always try to make the more conservative one. One of the other more liberal ones is you wouldn't believe. So why is that? And then we have, do you know, economists say there is enough food in the world to feed the population of the world 10 times over. And so on. The productive capacity of all these arable lands and so on in the world is enough to fill the population 10 times bigger than the world. So why is there still famine? Why is there still these problems? Why are we seeing now that there is, most of the population are below the poverty line? Why is this? It is because of the concentration of wealth. It is because of interest system, which promotes the concentration of wealth. It is because of, it's created a new kind of slavery, is debt slavery. You know, gone are the days when you're shackled and you're forced to do something. Those days are gone. Instead, the shackles are invisible, and you work in sweatshops to produce cut-price clothing materials, which will be sold in some market thousands of miles away and make people very rich. So we pay a lot of money for these kind of clothes, but they're actually made very cheaply, and the middleman gets a lot of money, and the people who make these clothes get a pittance for it. See, why is that? It's good business, according to capitalism, free market. You do it. As Bertrand Russell said, the advocates of capitalism are very apt to appeal to the sacred principles of liberty, which are embodied in one maxim: the fortunate must not be restrained in the exercise of tyranny over the unfortunate. Now, what does Islam say? Well, Islam, again, as I said before, does not focus only on the hereafter and forgets this world. In Surah Al-Qasas, ayah 77, it says, "But seek the abode of the hereafter, in which Allah has given you, but do not neglect your portion of worldly life, and be kind, even as Allah has been kind to you, and seek not corruption in the earth." So what does that mean? How does Islam view it? And in essence, when you hear it, it sounds like common sense. Islam says that human needs are not infinite. This is because of liberalism saying that the purpose of life is to seek pleasure, and because we can never seek this perfect state of absolute pleasure, because human beings were never designed to be in this kind of euphoric state of complete, total pleasure, what we call happiness. I mean, you can be happy, but the definition of happiness is now some kind of total sensory overload to the maximum possible degree and an infinite length, term of length. No, this is not happiness. This is how it's defined in liberal philosophy, but that's not happiness. How Islam says is that human needs are finite, are limited. What do you need to survive? Food, clothing, shelter, and of course energy or heat, and so on, to keep you warm when it's cold. And Prophet Muhammad said that the son of Adam has no better right than he would have a house wherein he may live, a piece of clothing wherein he may hide his nakedness, and a piece of bread and water. So this is the Prophet Muhammad kind of distilling now what is the basic right of the son of Adam, as in all human beings. Not just Muslims, all human beings. And then he said that people are not prevented, three things are not prevented from the people: water, the pastures, and fire. So this also includes the aspect of energy, and pastures, the means to produce that which satisfies man's requirements to live, as in food and so on, and clothing and all these aspects. So Islam considers that these needs are finite. So all you have to do is guarantee these finite needs, and everything else is luxury. Plasma screen, TV, the latest mobile phone, or iPhone, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, all these things are luxuries. And for these things, let them have a laissez-faire system. So, okay, compete with each other, have a free market for luxuries, let people compete with each other and develop and so on. That's great. But these fundamental needs are taken care of and guaranteed by the Shariah. And how is that achieved? The Prophet Muhammad said that whoever prevented the excess water to prevent with the excess pasture, Allah will prevent him of his bounty on their judgment. What does that mean? If your land, for example, is commenting, if your land is being irrigated by water and there's excess water, and so on, let it pass to your neighbour. Otherwise, you are culpable for this. Because no one owns natural resources, which are water, oil, gas, and so on. These are not owned by any private individual. You can't privatize these things. It belongs to all of us. All human beings have equal right in these resources. And these things should be given to the people directly at just the cost of being able to extract it from the earth and so on. And they can't afford it, then you subsidize it, which is done by means of a state. The main means to solve the economic problem when there are finite needs and there are resources is distribution, not production. Because production takes care of itself. When there's, in the market, if there's a need, then production will be increased by the producers, naturally, without you needing to focus on it. But distribution is the key element of Islamic economic science, to make sure that these resources are given to the places where they are needed, to those who need it. So in Surah 2, 275, Allah says, God permitted trade and forbade interest. When people said the interest is trading money, and the Quran says, no, God has forbidden, so God has permitted trade, but He has forbidden interest. And in another verse of the Quran, it says, lest it circulates solely amongst, the wealth circulates solely amongst a small circuit amongst you, in Surah Al-Hashr, Ayah 7. So, Islam tries to prevent wealth from concentrating. The Quran is saying it, lest it circulates amongst a small circuit amongst you. Islam doesn't want wealth to be concentrated, because the more people have the wealth, the better. Also, Islam prohibited hoarding of wealth. Your money is not going to do nothing in the bank, because you're not getting interest on it. So the only two options are left for you. Either you spend that money, or you reinvest that money back into some project. Imagine an economy where every day, everyone is reinvesting or spending all the wealth in that market back into that market. It will be even more dynamic than the capitalist market, of which there's mass hoarding of wealth. And also Islam prohibits interest, as I told you before, and gambling. Gambling which exploits the poor by offering them dreams of being rich. Which, and of course, as they say in Vegas, the house always wins. The people that offer this service, they always win. So this is the Islamic economic system, and I have to be very brief with this because time is running out. But inshallah, this is something which Islam has used. And if you look around and you see the brothers and sisters from Malaysia and Indonesia, how did they become Muslim? How did the ancestors become Muslim? Thank you. How did they? Yeah, did an Islamic army force them at a point of a sword to become Muslim? No. Do you know how they became Muslim? Their ancestors became Muslim? It's all purely through interaction with Muslim traders and merchants. So okay, a few Sufi missionaries here and there, but generally, merchants and traders, they interacted with on the trade routes, and they saw the justice and fairness of the Islamic economic system. And it's a system that produced the first checking system, bank checks, during the medieval ages, where you didn't have electronic devices to check whether a check is real or not. Whatever, you didn't have that, but it fully functioned and was a very efficient system in the medieval ages. This is the economic system, and there's many evidence I can give. For example, when one individual was delegated by the Caliph to spread the zakat money, which I'll get to in a second, in North Africa, give it alms to the poor, and he came back after 2 months with all the money still in his in the bag or whatever he was distributing it with. And the Caliph said, you haven't distributed any money, and he was getting angry with him. I said, no, I swear I couldn't find a single poor person in all North Africa to give it to. He couldn't find a single poor person in Africa, well, at least North Africa, where the Muslims were controlling. He couldn't find a single poor person. If I said this today, you just think I'm joking. That guy's having a laugh. But that was in the medieval ages. That was at least 7th or 8th century. So imagine that, and they achieved the elimination of poverty in the medieval ages. And not even we can do this today. We can't even do that today. So, it seems like they were more progressive in the past than they are in the modern time. And lastly, the final barrier, or the final protection, that's my last point I'll mention on economics, is to allow wealth distribution, is a system of wealth redistribution called the zakat tax. And the zakat tax, essentially, is that every Muslim must pay 2.5% of their wealth to the needy, the poor, the debtors, to free slaves from bondage. So if a person is a slave, you should buy that slave and free them. Zakat tax. It has 8 categories of whom it's given to. And this was to help redistribute wealth. That was the final mechanism to prevent the concentration of wealth that Islam has, which we still as Muslims pay today, even though we don't have a state to implement it. I'll briefly pass on the last 2 aspects of Sharia, the penal system, which is very controversial, as you probably have seen on TV and so on. But the misapplications aside, which we see in many of these Muslim countries which don't implement this Sharia system, by the way, the Islamic punishments have an advantage over the current punishment system. John Stuart Mill, who's a very liberal philosopher, was against the abolition of capital punishment in this country because he said that if you abolish capital punishment, you will not deter crime. It will be an encouragement to criminals. Now our prisons are filled to overflowing. The country that has the biggest prison population in the world is America. The biggest prison population per person and in size. It beats even China, which has 1 billion people in that country. Even China it beats. Why is that? It's because there is no sufficient deterrent and many other and individualism in itself, but the deterrent is not there. What Islam does is very simple. The punishment system is quick. It's done on the day, so to speak. You don't have to keep someone locked up away from their family and their loved ones missing them, or their loved ones suffering. Now, why deprive their loved ones of that person? That person is punished instantly and he's returned back to his loved ones very quickly. And it has an element of forgiveness. You can forgive someone for stealing, you can forgive someone even for murder, but then you have to pay a recompense back to the family. And that's purely at the discretion of the family. So there is forgiveness in the system of Islam, which you don't get in any other penal system in the world. Forgiveness. You just don't get it. The multicultural system, and that will be my last aspect I'm going to discuss. The multicultural system of Islam is by far the most tolerant system on earth. And I'll prove it. In Islam, we don't expect non-Muslims to live by Shariah. They don't believe in it. Why are you going to impose a system on people who don't believe in that system? If you're a non-Muslim who lives in a Muslim country, you should not be fasting when it's time for Ramadan, or punished for eating pork or drinking alcohol, because you don't believe it's forbidden. Yeah, we believe it's forbidden, you don't. So Islam even allowed them to have their own court system. So Jews had their own court system, Christians had their own court system, and you don't even get this kind of system today. And even when Muslims get small arbitration courts, there's already now nationalists complaining about it, saying that everyone must conform, one law for everybody. You know, you must adopt the values of this country. If you don't, then you are, a dangerous country. You must be dealt with. Like in France, these people are enemies to our French values and so on and so forth. In Switzerland, banned minarets, all these different things they did. Banned niqab. They're intolerant. In the Islamic system, the Christian and Jew, you can dress what you want as a Christian and Jew. You can go to your courts and have any kind of judgment you want. And as was remarked by one of the famous historians, that many historians across the board in Al-Andalus and Iraq and so on, these places, Jews and Christians went to their own courts, and in some cases, a lot of cases, they even went to the Islamic courts instead for arbitration, because there was justice there. The system, they viewed it as quite enlightened and impartial. And the Prophet Muhammad said, whoever harms a non-Muslim who lives in an Islamic state, the word's called a dhimmi, a person under covenant, you've made a covenant with that person for protection. Whoever harms a dhimmi, a non-Muslim, has harmed me. The Prophet Muhammad said this: whoever harms a non-Muslim living in Muslim land has harmed me. He also said, whoever oppresses a person under covenant or imposes on him something more than he can afford, or humiliates him, or takes anything from him without his consent, I will oppose him on a day of judgment. This is in our texts. This should be scary for every Muslim who's ever mistreated a non-Muslim in the Muslim world. That the covenant of the Prophet Muhammad is upon that person. Whoever's harmed a non-Muslim has harmed them. And we all condemn any violence or any mistreatment of non-Muslims in the Muslim world. But unfortunately, the Muslim world is not under the Sharia system. It has bits and bobs of it, so to speak, but it doesn't have this full system. It doesn't have anything near the full system. And unfortunately, it's due to these secular oppressive dictators which are suppressing this. Remember Mubarak, they say, look, Egypt is a Muslim country, it's got Sharia. Oh, look how the Christians are being treated. But when Mubarak was falling, he told America, oh, please keep me in power. I'm the only thing that keeps the Islamists at bay. Well, what does something want to do? They want to establish Sharia. So Egypt is not a Sharia country. In fact, Mubarak was an ally of the West to prevent this situation, because liberalism is fundamentally intolerant of every other way of life. It hates communism, and it hates, on the political aspect, Islam. It wants only Islam to be a religion like Christianity, like it already neutered Christianity, and it neutered Judaism, and it wants Islam to also be neutered likewise. And that's why it's very intolerant. That's why you hear all this hate speech about Islam, political Islam or Islamism, because liberalism is fundamentally intolerant of every different system. Whereas Islam, we recognize that Judaism, in its full sense, has a law system as well. We recognize that. Fine, have your court. No problem, not a threat to us. Christianity, or back in the day in the Catholic version, was political. Fine, have your own court, no threat to us. We expect you to be different. That's fine, we celebrate it. But in the West, no, it's one value. You must prize the nation above all other values. You are a British person first, then you are a Jew, Christian, Muslim, or a French person first, then you are a Jew, Christian, Muslim. If anyone says otherwise, they are a threat to this country, a threat to this nation. And this is the intolerance. And as for foreign policy, and I'm going to allow time for questions because my time is over. But as for foreign policy, and I will bring up these verses in the Quran, should you ask me this question. Foreign policy with Islam is not about jihad conveying the sword, because the Quran says there is no compulsion in religion because truth is clear from falsehood. In another verse of the Quran it says, had Allah wanted, He would have made the whole world one religion. But He didn't. So if Allah decided not to make the whole world one religion, how can we now impose one religion on the whole world? And this is what it says in the Quran. Islam not only fights for justice, and when the Quran says, oh, what is wrong with you, it's talking to the Muslims, that you fight not for the weak and oppressed throughout the earth, who cry out, O Lord, send from us someone who will help. So this is why Muslims will go to war for justice, to defend ourselves and to defend other people, even if they are not Muslim, because as Muslims we prioritize justice. And if you establish justice in the world, then it will come back to you. But if you establish injustice in the world, then that will also come back to you. And this is, I think, let's say, what goes around comes around. Anyway, I hope you've seen now that the system of Sharia, the solutions it can give, how it provides a better understanding, intellectual basis, addressing of human nature, society, economics, and even multiculturalism than liberalism has done, and communism to a non-different extent, although I haven't discussed much communism. And inshallah, please give your questions, and hopefully we can get some more understandings about Sharia. Jazakallah khair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Abdullah. That was a very broad discussion, but it had to be, I guess. We'll take questions now, so we'll start the question and answer session. Yes, please go ahead.
I completely agree with you. It's quite refreshing to hear someone speak about capitalism and communism in such direct terms. So, is Shariah's definition is the path of the water, broadly defined. I just wondered if it is a kind of peaceful salvation in a way of life, then how can people who say they follow the Prophet Muhammad and the religion, how can they say that they follow the Sharia law, if it's a peaceful law, and then harm other people who might be non-Muslims? Why, if that is against your law, why do they do that?
Well, you see, there are two types of, you could say, individuals amongst Muslim discourse. And there's a third. The third, I would say, is the mainstream Orthodox. But there are two other types. One is the modernists, which are people which are essentially Muslims who adopted liberalism and try to interpret Islam to fit liberalism, which we don't agree with, and you can't. But the other type are those who are very bitter about the colonial history, the oppression by these various dictators propped up by Western powers. And if you speak to these people, they have a very kind of immoral understanding of justice. They view that, well, these people bomb our countries and kill our women and children, so I'm going to kill their women and children. You see, now, this is not what Islam says. This is fundamentally contrary to Islam says. And it was very interesting because one person, a journalist who interviewed Osama bin Laden, of all people, put this point to him. That does not say, there's not the Prophet Muhammad command that you don't kill women and children and innocents. And he said, yes, but it's not set in stone. Osama said this. It's in a book written by a non-Muslim biographer, I forgot the name of it, which was a compilation of authentic statements of Osama bin Laden, and this is what he said. Okay, it's not set in stone. So he was saying that he's essentially advocating that you have to reinterpret it for a modern context, or a modern world. Funnily enough. So Osama bin Laden is a modernist, essentially. And I don't subscribe to that. I think that we do not belittle ourselves and put ourselves to the same level as those who oppress us and do bad things to us and so on. The Prophet Muhammad said, do not be treacherous to those who are treacherous to you. So I've met people with different opinions and ideas. I've yet to meet someone who advocates killing civilians and so on. I only hear about it on the news or apparently they exist in some internet forum somewhere which I've never seen or been to. But taking it for granted as Osama bin Laden's statement, this statement is un-Islamic. And in some ways, in any scripture or book, if you really want to have a particular understanding of that, which fits what you want, you can twist anything. Any system, any law, you can say the mean doesn't mean that, the word that everyone knows what it means doesn't mean that. The Quran is against killing innocents, but I don't think non-Muslims are innocent anyway, which has never been the case. The Prophet Muhammad has never said that, ever. Yeah, but now these modern guys come around and say, well, with a brand new interpretation that fits their anger and angst that they have inside them. And really, they don't need a theologian, they need a therapist. Any other questions? Just at the back.
Is it accurate to assume that every Muslim country adopts the Shariah law?
It is inaccurate to assume because, let's take a few cases, yeah? Let's say Tunisia, yeah? A majority Muslim country, but they locked off the mosques and at one point they prohibited public wearing of hijab for women. In Turkey, there's a prohibition of wearing hijab in universities and state institutions in a majority Muslim country. Why is that? Yeah, if you look at these countries, our scholars are either locked up or they are paid and controlled by the state. Whereas, historically speaking, our scholars have always been independent of the state. And that couldn't be controlled. They can give their opinions freely and openly, and they could condemn the state. For example, almost all four of the great imams, or the great scholars of the Muslim world, Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Shafi, and Ahmad bin Hanbal, all at some point fell foul of the leaders because they criticized them and corrected them. And this is what you're meant to do in Islam. The Prophet Muhammad didn't say that, well, you can't correct the leader or go against because it's God's will, he's representing of God on the earth. No, he said that if you see oppression, you prevent that person from oppressing. And the Prophet Muhammad said, help your brother whether he is oppressed or the oppressor. And his companions said, Ya Rasulullah, we know about the first statement where you say, help your brother whether he's oppressed. But why should we help him when he's the oppressor? And the Prophet Muhammad said, by preventing him from oppressing. You stop that person from oppressing. You hold his hand. There's many verses, many hadiths, narrations of the Prophet Muhammad where you say, hold tightly the hands of the oppressor. It's an Arabic expression to mean you stop that person from oppressing, and if needs be, you engage with physical action against the oppressor. Very much what the Libyan people are doing now.
What is the argument in Islam for those who turn away from Islam as a religion?
Good question. This is, I think she's alluding to what they call the apostasy law. But really, what it actually was, and I think, let me illustrate with a hadith of Prophet Muhammad. One Bedouin went to Prophet Muhammad one day and said, and embraced Islam, became Muslim. Then the next day, he came back to the Prophet Muhammad and said, release me from my pledge. He said, release me from it. He asked once, the Prophet Muhammad turned away. He asked the second time, Prophet Muhammad turned away. He asked the third time, Prophet Muhammad turned away. And the guy got angry, just left. He just literally left the city of Medina and went back to the desert because he's a Bedouin. Now, the Prophet Muhammad didn't say, right, kill this person for asking for his pledge to be reneged, or get this, deal with this person, or execute this person. He never did. But in the cases that there was this now, you must now prosecute these people, were people who not only left Islam, but they helped the enemies of the Muslims to attack or kill other Muslims, or plot and plan with the opposing tribes which are trying to fight and have killed Muslims. So in this situation, these people were prosecuted when they were caught. And why is that? Yeah, it's because it is the treason law, not the apostasy law. It's treason against the state. Because outside of the state, the law doesn't exist. So if there's no Islamic state and someone apostatizes, no one can punish you. You can't kill an apostate, quote unquote an apostate, whatever you want to define it as, it only exists within a state. And why is that? Because it's linked to an Islamic state. It's linked to the state, and that is treason, which is understood. And in America, you still have death penalty, and for treason, it still exists to this very day. So that shouldn't be controversial. But unfortunately, it is misinterpreted because it looks bad, because it reminds Europeans of their Christian past. Because in Christian past, if you left the faith, if you recanted the faith, then you would be executed. There is no reprieve, no mercy, or no, you can leave. They will hunt you down and will execute you as being a heretic and apostate. And because this has so traumatized the European psyche, that whenever they see something that seems like that, then they think, oh my God, this is now going back to the medieval ages. But it's something completely different. It's something even more modern, you could say. So I hope that answers your question, but you can please come back if you want to.
Don't all the main schools of Sharia law, do they not all say that death is the punishment for someone who, say, converts from Islam to another religion?
Well, death is the punishment for treason, yes.
Apostasy?
Well, as I said, that's the English translation. You know, the ihtidad, to turning your back or leaving a community, it is translated as treason. Treason is defined as to defect, to leave from a community, to turn your back against it, to go against it. And what I'm saying is this is what the Prophet Muhammad did, and what we saw. Let me also I'll explain that not every idea is a benign idea. Example, in the liberal state of Germany, 1920s and 30s, it was a liberal state. It was a liberal country. There were a group of them got into this belief. They left liberalism and they became nationalists, extreme nationalists, otherwise known as National Socialists, otherwise known as Nazis. And they advocated certain ideas of national purity and national values, that, you know, one value for all Germans and so on, and the Jews don't follow or adhere onto these values. Now, if you had nipped Hitler in the bud before he became powerful, you would have spared millions of lives. But because he was allowed to have this dangerous idea which advocated killing people and some kind of superiority complex or what have you, then the German society collapsed and a Nazi regime was formed. Now, this is what this law is designed to, the treason law is designed to protect the Islamic society from this. If you have a problem with Sharia or Islam or what have you, then the person can simply leave. You don't have to be part, no one's going to hunt you down, no one's going to come after you, you can go. And even in cases where people had left Islam and left society, and then they had come back into that society, and they were brought before the Prophet Muhammad, and these people were not punished and even let go by the Prophet Muhammad. Because the Prophet Muhammad, if you notice any narration, and I challenge anyone to bring this, the Prophet Muhammad never ordered the execution of anyone that came in front of him. In fact, in one case, one person who had fought against the Muslims, killed Muslims, was brought to him and asked for the pledge of security, which is like the kind of a pagan, an Arabic kind of culture whereby if you're captured by an enemy, you ask for kind of, please give me your security, meaning don't kill me. And the Prophet Muhammad refused to do it. And then he asked again, refused to do it. He asked the third time, refused to do it. Asked again, the Prophet Muhammad said, okay. Yeah, and the Prophet Muhammad was forced by a guy who fought against Muslims to be granted mercy in his presence. He didn't have to. There was no public opinion. There was no, news media around saying, "Oh, is he a merciful or not merciful guy?" No, he had full right to do it, and even then he forgave the person. Yeah. So this is the Prophet Muhammad and Islam is not a kind of callous or merciless system. Rather, it only advocates things to prevent greater injustice or greater, the tumult and oppression from resulting. And the case of Nazi Germany with the liberal society becoming overtaken by the supremacist ideology is a case in point.
Before we move on to the next question, I just wanted to help just to clarify your question. There is actually a debate amongst Muslims on how to interpret it. During the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad, when people did apostate, they were not executed. There are scholars who will say they should be executed, but if you look at the example of the Prophet Muhammad, they were not executed. So I just wanted to clarify. We'll move on to the next question. Dr. Muhammad,
thank you so much. Firstly, like the values of Sharia that you've highlighted, they really strike a resonance with me and my own faith. So I was just wondering, can you follow Sharia and not be a Muslim?
Well, I would say no, because then the media would say, look, a non-Muslim is being forced to follow Sharia. No, Daily Mail and all that, or Daily Star, was it? Yeah. Well, you can, and this is what happens. Historically speaking, Jews and Christians are very interesting case in point, because the Judaic law is virtually identical to Sharia law in many aspects. And Christian social teaching, I think it was called Catholic social teaching, and there must be a Protestant equivalent, was very much about having morals implemented in society. And if you read the works of Augustine on the City of God, there he goes into the issues of applying, these morals into political systems. It's a big book, but if you can get through it, then it's quite interesting. And yes, a Christian and Jew actually feel totally at home, because in a way Islam views itself as the correction, or rather perfection, of the previous two revelations. Not that the revelations were wrong, but rather that for some reason, way or form, either they got secularized or there were different situations. And Islam is a fully holistic system, which has essentially the same morals as Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, and advocates it to be implemented in society. So a Jew and Christian would feel totally at home. I mean, as I said, there was a similarity between the halakha law, which is the Jewish law, and this Sharia law is striking, actually. So it was absolutely shocking when I encountered it on many aspects. In Christianity, women should dress modestly as well. Jesus' mother wore a hijab. And so, but maybe if she was in France, she wouldn't be allowed to, and so on. Yeah, and the Jews in the temple would be told not to pray ostentatiously in public, as they say now in France. So this is, the case. So yeah, a Jew and a Christian could live totally happily and very peacefully, actually, by the implementation of their laws. And as the Quran says, to every people, Allah revealed a Sharia and a way of implementing it. And I feel, this is my personal opinion, I feel that Christianity today and Judaism today still has the same morals, but they've been neutered of the way of applying these morals, and because of bad historical past failures or problems or issues that came about, and it's now discolored the whole view of religion now. And we feel that, I think, Islam could help all people of the Abrahamic faiths and other faiths to actually implement their morals in a very enlightened way in public life.
Gentleman, please.
Thank you for your talk. If I understand correctly, then, what you're saying is that Sharia law is a code by which you, if you like, practice what is written in the Quran. Is that essentially what you're saying?
Well, it's prescribed by the Quran and the example of the Prophet Muhammad.
Sure, okay. So I think what you're also suggesting is that, if you like, that pure code, if you like, as prescribed in the Quran, that in the so-called Islamic states around the world, that there is a lot of corruption of that code. Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm
Which
saying
probably leads to a lot of misunderstanding.
I'm saying that
what code actually is.
Code is blatantly not even implemented.
Yeah.
And I think blatantly. To give a better example, it's like this. The only system that Muslims have ever known, and what the Islamic text mandate, is what they call a caliphate system.
Yeah.
So essentially, by process of consultation, as the Quran says, by consultation to discharge your affairs, that as Muslims we get together and we select one person amongst us to implement the collective obligations and duties that Sharia ordains. And this is vested in one individual who is accountable to that people who put him into power to implement a code of law that he has no choice in. So we don't have a dictator because he can't dictate. He's just an executive. He has to execute the predefined laws, which are handed to him by either scholars and so on. He's a politician. How he tries to implement it for each situation, and so as politicians do. Now, in this system, he has no choice but to implement the Sharia law. He can't go against it. He can't breach it. If he does, he'll be taken to court. Everyone's accountable under law. The rule of law is an Islamic concept. But in the Muslim world, unfortunately, after the breakup of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924, of which today is the sad anniversary of it, funny enough, or not so funny enough, but it's the situation we've been broken into different parts, given this identity, this artificial identity called nationalism or national identity, which essentially is an artificial creation that didn't exist beforehand. You know, like in Malaysia and Indonesia, are they not ethnic Malays? But there's a a division created between them. Pakistanis and Bengalis and Indians, they weren't all split into 3 states before, but they were created like so. And Jordanians and Syrians and so on, and Palestinians, they were very identical, and all their language is the same, and their practice and customs were the same, but they were cut into parts. And this is nationalism, just is an artificial identity, and it's cut us into parts, and each different part, because it was a small country, and as Lawrence Arabia said, that if you cut the different Muslim countries into smaller parts, they can't all unite and be strong, and you can now have some capacity to control these different states. That we've had secular dictators who have prevented us from implementing the Sharia law. Some of them try to co-opt a bit of it and to say that it supports them or justifies their existence, and you can't rise up against this leader because the Islam says you can't, when it doesn't apply to a king or a president, or there's no such thing as a king or a president or a prime minister in Islam. There's only a caliph, and the caliph is just an executive. So you have now absolute autocratic rulers that are above the law, and they can dictate what the law is. And I'll tell you one funny little joke. This is from Saudi Arabia. It's absolutely true. Apparently one US diplomat had a problem with trade with Saudi Arabia. One scholar had declared that a vanilla extract had some un-Islamic substance in it, and this was hurting US trade with Saudi Arabia. So the diplomat contacted the king of the time and said, "Could you sort this out? Because we can't trade this, and it's hurting US exports." And the guy doesn't go, "Oh, let me consult the scholars." He goes, "1 second." Call back a few minutes later. It's sorted. You can export it to us. The king can do whatever he wants in any of these countries. The leader, the autocrat, the president. And they are above the law, and they can decide the law. These scholars again are prisoners of these regimes. And what we're seeing now with the Egyptian uprising, the Tunisian uprising, and Libya uprising, as well as uprisings which are in various states of success in Yemen and other countries, is that people are fed up of this, and we want to be able to decide our own political future, which is an Islamic future. But we first need to remove these dictators which lock up people like me, like other mainstream Muslims who advocate Islam or dare to advocate in public life. They'll lock up these people, torture them, kill them, what have you. So hopefully, inshallah, we can get this freedom from these dictators, and then we can implement the Islam that our books tell us to implement, and inshallah be a good example. And through that example, hopefully bring some justice to the world, which is the main aspect or the main aim of the Sharia law in the first place.
Can I've got a second part to my question, which I just now, thank you for that, is, okay, having heard what you said, having seen the corrupted versions and so on, which is all apparent, where can you find something close to your pure model, do you suppose? Where can people who are not into this actually look at it and see it actually happening?
Well,
is there any example? I
it's
know it's more philosophical than real.
Yeah. But there's no sliding scale of
it's very
Islam
hard just to understand something from a series of lectures.
Sure.
As human beings, we like to see things happening so that we can actually learn from something that is actually happening rather than just being told to us. So not the preachings, but the actuality.
But if we depended on seeing the ideal before implementing it, then the French and American revolutions wouldn't happen, neither would have the Soviet Revolution, neither would any kind of revolution changing any kind of system would have happened if the prerequisite was that system to exist before it was created. Or in our situation, to be re-established. All I can point to is look at the history of Islamic history, and you'll see these aspects implemented in medieval times, achieving feats which the Muslim world can't even achieve today. You see, can't even achieve today. So you had libraries in Cordoba, almost had 1 million books. Find me any library in the Muslim world today that has 1 million books. You'd be hard pressed. You see, and they even rivals the British, library to some extent, and so on.
I'm not quite convinced by your argument about the French Revolution and so on, because obviously that was a very, very bloodthirsty situation. So it
No,
was
no, no,
something that I'd
it's
say
it's
is
not the
most
nature of the
modern
revolution.
as opposed to another.
Sure, it's not a nature revolution. I mean, I could call it the English Glorious Revolution or the English Civil War, with its, and the concepts of the Leviathan concept of a representative government representing the people. The only reason why I brought this example is not because of what actually happened, but rather because they were driven initially by idealists who had an ideal. They saw an ideal, and the ideal didn't exist anywhere in the world, so they tried to create this ideal. This ideal, I don't think, was so ideal, but it was a proof that human beings don't require to see the ideal practice before they implement it. That's the whole point. It has to be initiated from somewhere. And with the Muslims, we have a history for 1,300 years of this ideal being implemented. I would say that the worst thing that ever happened to the Muslim civilization was success. Because success made us complacent, it made us lazy, we stopped being forward-thinking, we became backward-thinking, looking back to the glorious past, and just maintaining that. And over time, everyone, Europe discovered America, killed loads of Indians, got their resources, and became immensely rich, and overpowered us eventually through technological progress, taking our work, and then taking the torch. So this is the situation. Hopefully the Muslim world is in a reawakening, and we can decide our political future and implement this. And in essence, I'm not saying that if you want to see an example, or I say, well, what I can ask you is be patient, we'll try and provide one soon.
I think we'll move on to the next question. I think the point has been made that if you do want to see an example, you have to look into history where it was implemented. Yes, Brian.
You've established this Shariah law that the people tell us about. If in a society or a state it were established, would Christians be able to publicly worship, have their own buildings? Would they be able to share their faith?
Sure. That's a good question, but easily answered. Let me put it like this. There was a group of Christians from a tribe called Najran, and they came to the Prophet Muhammad's mosque in Medina, and they sat down in a whole congregation in the Prophet's own mosque. And then they had a debate with Prophet Muhammad, and they expressed their Christianity, and they told Prophet Muhammad to his face that we think maybe you're a false prophet. We don't believe that you're the prophet of God. They told it to his own face in his own mosque, in his own city. And after that, they had their own congregational prayer in the mosque, in the Prophet's own mosque. Christians having a congregational prayer service in the Prophet's mosque. And afterwards, they went about their business and went back to Najran and so on and so forth. Now, I think that should answer your question. Or to maybe give you many examples, there are so many other examples. In Al-Andalus, where I'm from, I'm Portuguese in origin, in Al-Andalus, you had a building. On Friday it was a mosque, on Saturday it was a synagogue, and on Sunday it was a church. So, must charge some rent or something. Anyway, so Jews, Christians, and Muslims had no problem living side by side. In fact, you had Jews like Ibn Quraysh, a Jewish scholar, write books attacking Islam, attacking Prophet Muhammad. You had St. John of Damascus writing a book attacking Islam, attacking Muhammad, and there was no death fatwas on them, and they were living in the Islamic system. They were living in a Shariah country, and they were writing scathing attacks on Islam. And all that happened to them was, at that time, Ibn Hazm was a Muslim scholar. He wrote a book refuting his book, like scholars do. One writes a book, one writes a refutation, and so on, ad infinitum, ad nauseam. So, that's what happened. So, you've had it before. In some degrees, you have it in many parts of Muslim world today still, but not as much as it used to be in the Islamic times. And this is a problem. Some Christians are afraid to express their opinions in certain countries. In other countries, they're very free. In Muslim countries, like the Doha debates is in Doha. It's a Muslim country. Yeah, well, a friend of mine debated in UAE, a Christian who was actually a former Muslim, and a guy called Thabiti. My friend debated this guy who was a former Muslim, and they debated on Islamic Christianity in UAE, which is a Muslim country, and of course Malaysia and Indonesia as well. Although there are still issues because of nationalism. Nationalism is the biggest cause of inter-community violence and tension in every single country throughout the world. Look at India. Look at the Hindus, how they treat Christians in Orissa province, unfortunately. Not all Hindus, but there are some fascist Hindus, and how they treat Christians in Orissa province is horrific as well. So, and this is due to nationalism, whereas before that, in the Muslim times, there was no intersect rivalry. So I would say that Islam is not only allowing tolerance, but it is needed to solve the problems of intolerance in today's world.
Next question. Yes?
Regarding tolerance, it has to be two-way, of course. 6 months ago, a Pentecostal preacher in the States said he's going to burn a Quran. I actually wrote to my email friend, about 150, and I said, we've got to pray this guy does it. Because I'm a Christian. That would be a totally wrong thing to do. But in regard to tolerance, the opposite side of that is that there are thousands of Muslims who are willing to become very violent. And we did see there were killings in Pakistan over it because of the riot. Imagine incidental killings, that people just got killed because of the riot, not people being targeted. But the tolerance has to be on both sides, that Muslims must understand that we don't understand. And sometimes people say and do things against Islam and we don't realize the full extent of the sensitivities behind it. I mean, the Mohammed cartoons from Denmark, I mean, I never saw them, and I don't care to see them, but I can understand how insulting that would be. If anybody insulted the Lord Jesus in the same way, I'd be very upset, but I wouldn't be going to arms over it. And I wonder if we shouldn't be teaching the radical Muslims who would go to arms over these things that this isn't the way to go.
Well, my answer to that would be very simple. But first I must address the Islamic perspective of this. Islam believes in intellectual debate and criticism. Much like some people criticize today, much like the debates that I've done with many Christians and so on and so forth, and my colleagues have as well. And that's fine. This is intellectual debate and criticism. You can say, I don't believe that Prophet Muhammad is the prophet of God, I believe that he's not, or I believe he's a false prophet, or whatever. Because obviously a Christian must believe this. If they don't want to be Muslim, then they're going to have to believe this. It's the only explanation they can come to, and that's fine. That's expressing your opinion. However, there's a difference between expression of intellectual opinion or discussion debate and deliberate, gratuitous insult. Now, the Quran's very consistent. It says that it commands the Muslims that do not insult the idols, referring to the pagans. Do not insult their idols, lest they insult your God in their ignorance. For Muslims, we are iconoclastic, so to speak. Our faith is iconoclastic. We dislike idols, idolatry. We are against pagan ideals or worship practices. And it's the most, metaphysically speaking, it is something that we really dislike the most. However, the Quran tells us that we're not allowed to insult this. Even this, we can't insult. There are idols, idolatry. We can't do it. Because, lest they insult our God in their ignorance. Would we like it if they insulted our belief? No. So why do we insult theirs? So the Quran is telling Muslims, do not insult. So as Muslims, we are expected then, we expect that people will treat our faith in the same way as we treat other faiths. Now, to be fair, some Muslims do insult other people's faiths, and that is un-Islamic because they're going against what the Quran is saying in explicit terms. However, Muslims expect some respect because respect for what you hold dear is human nature. And as much as a person who believes in liberalism might preach to me to say, oh, but you must tolerate this, is about tolerance, I say, yes, but it goes against human nature. You don't have a problem with Islam, you have a problem with human nature. Humans don't like what they hold dear being insulted. You can criticize, you can debate, that's fine, that satisfies why you have free speech in the first place. The point of free speech is not to play with rules of the playground. The role of free speech is to promote intellectual debate and get to the truth as best as possible and to have this dialectic going on. That's totally fine. But to insult someone gratuitously with that intention, this is something else now. You can't justify that rationally by invoking free speech. And human nature testifies to that. Now, what I'll say is this. Some people say, to counter this, that, oh, but anyone could be offended by anything you say. But that's not what I said. It's not offense. That's the problem. It's if you intend to insult. So whether someone's offended or not by you saying whatever, that's their problem. But if it is reasonably shown that you intend to insult, then this is common sense. Everyone knows when someone intends to insult you. It's common sense. You don't need a legal definition and so on. Even judges have to judge whether something is libelous or slander. Currently in the law system, they have to judge this. So if you can show that there's intent, then this is, I think, is a problem. And I also want to condemn the attacks and insults on Christianity, which is happening in this country and in America as well, especially in America with the culture wars going on between secularists and Christians in USA. And I condemn this. Yeah, fine, I'm all for debating Islam, Christianity, Judaism, that's fine. But to insult, I condemn it on any person's faith because the Quran condemns it. And I have to follow what the Quran says. And I also advocate, your last point, should we tell Muslims not to get violent? I'll say the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself had rubbish thrown on him by people who were insulting him, and he never got violent. Yeah, he was abused. Who you know, out of all of us, who is better in the Muslim belief than the Prophet Muhammad for a Muslim? Yeah, and he himself never got violent when people threw rubbish on his head. They threw it on his head, and they insulted him in his own city, in his own town. Yeah, and he tolerated it. He didn't get violent. So why are we? Why some of us getting violent? And I'm advocating to come back to Islam, and what the teaching of the Prophet Muhammad is also.
Next question. Yes.
Sorry to backtrack a little bit, but you answered a question a few minutes ago about whether you can be a non-Muslim and follow Shariah. I just like to clarify. I may have misunderstood, but did you say that if you follow Shariah, you get gifts in heaven or reward in heaven?
Well, I mean, if you basically, in the Muslim belief, if you obey God's commands, you obviously are rewarded in heaven. And if you don't, then there's a punishment. And obviously, Allah can forgive you out of His mercy. And this is a different discussion, this is a theological discussion. But I think everyone believes, whether you're Christian or Jew, or a Muslim, that if you obey what God commands, then you get your just reward. And I think in the New Testament, Jesus said, even Jesus is reported to have said that if you love God, then obey Him, and so follow Him. So this is a condition. Now, if you love God, then you must obey the teachings which are given to us. And this is the same. If you said, well, a non-Muslim be rewarded for obeying the Shariah, well, it depends why you're following the Shariah for. If you're following the Shariah because you want to worship God, then that's between you and God and so on. And if you're following the Shariah because everyone else is doing it, well, that's just aping your society, which a lot of people do anyway.
So it's a matter of the heart.
Sure. Well, I said, even in the verse of the Quran, it did say that there are a group of Christians who, on the Day of Judgment, will not grieve, and their reward will be with God because they're not arrogant. They're not arrogant and so on. But as well as to caveat that, because we do believe that Islam is the final word, one of the final verses of the Quran saying that it will not be accepted from you, any other religion except Islam, once you're convinced. But what I was adding to caveat to this is a theological discussion, is that God judges whether you sincerely believe the truth after knowing the truth. So on the Day of Judgment, if you can answer God with a clear conscience why you believe what you believe, then God is merciful, and that's fine. If you have a clear conscience and you really were sincere and you tried to, then as Imam Ghazali said, that the famous Muslim scholar, that then your reward is with God, even if you didn't happen to know about Islam through some reason or so. If you can answer God with a clear conscience, then you're saved.
Any other questions? We'll go with... Yes, please.
First off, thanks very much. I found the talk really interesting. Now, I ask you to forgive my ignorance that I'm obviously going here to learn a bit more. I was just wondering, I've been told in the past that Islam follows a sort of kind of ladder rung system, in which the ultimate aim is like an entire global society, in which entire global Islamic society, with one man as like the leader who communicates and gets his orders directly from God. I was wondering,
It's a Catholic Church, but alright.
Is that a correct representation, or is that a...
No, because we're all humans who are not prophets, and so how can we communicate with God, or say that God told us to bomb Iraq or whatever? President Bush, I think some previous president said that. So, no, but as every ideology on this face this earth, whether you're liberal or communist or what have you, if you believe in what your ideology offers justice, and you want all human beings to live in justice, then obviously you'd want your ideology to spread. But the debate is how it spread. And there are liberals who, a lot of liberals, in fact most liberals, who advocate that you can use violence to spread liberalism. So they call spreading democracy, spreading freedom. And you'll have their soldiers go out saying, we're fighting for freedom, and going attacking other countries. They're the jihadi liberals, if you coin a term, although jihad is not about going into other countries and taking people's material resources as well. So that's what I would say. That every ideology believes that it should expand in order to administer all human beings with justice, what it sees as justice. However, with Islam, there is different streams of thought. Whatever stream of thought it is, there was one stream of thought which says actually most streams of thought say by example, so we will spread by example. So Malaysia and Indonesia was conquered by example, not by army. Yeah? West Africa was not conquered by army, it was conquered by example. And they just adopted Islam as a state belief. Abyssinia, I'll give you another example. Abyssinia was a very interesting state because it was a Christian king, and the Muslims encountered that very early on in the Prophet Muhammad encountered obviously this Christian king in his duties, and he was a very just king. And because he was a just king, and the Prophet Muhammad said this king is a very just king, that the Abyssinian state was not attacked by any Muslim armies for 1,000 years. 1,000 years. And then you said, but what happened after that? Even then there was no Muslim armies attacking Abyssinia. Some Abyssinians became Muslim, and for some reason they became militant, and they started to fight to create an Abyssinian Islamic state within Abyssinia. But these were native Abyssinians who adopted Islam, so you can't blame external forces. And so it's like a bunch of English people adopting Islam and then wanting to create an Islamic state in England. If they convert to Islam and they want to do that, well, you have to maybe chat to them. But that's what happened. So Islam is mostly spread by example. But when the Muslims came onto the world stage, they encountered many oppressive states with dictators and dictatorial theocracies like the Roman Byzantines, the Persian Empire, the Persian emperor was God incarnate on earth, and he had loads of slaves and servants which were oppressed, his population. And the Muslims fought against these dictators and overtime system, but never forced the populations to adopt Islam. You see, so it's not about, so in a way you could say Islam deals with dictators, but it does not force people to become Muslim. So if you are of that sense, then you'll do that. Other people say, hopefully, for example, it will filter. Whichever school of thought you're in, though, these are the opinions. But in the West, unfortunately, there is those who want to spread democracy by violence. But it just so happens that every country that want to do that has vast resources of oil, gas, and so on and so forth. Coincidentally.
Any more questions? Yes.
How about the aspect of check and balance within the Sharia or the state?
Aspect of check
and balance.
Accounting the ruler. Ah, yes. Okay, that's a very good question. I did ask that being brought up. In Islam, what we view is Muslims don't believe in the political concept or the political philosophical concept called democracy as it is ruled by the majority. The Quran says if you follow the majority of people on earth, they will lead you far astray. Reason being is because does the majority make anything right? Just because the majority follow it, is it right? The Nazis were elected by majority. Does that mean what they did was right? No. The American founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, they didn't trust the majority. They said it openly, the tyranny of the majority, they didn't trust it. So they had to implement a constitution that would guarantee certain rights because they couldn't trust the majority to give rights to minorities in their state. So it's not just what Muslims say, they've noticed it as well. And in essence, the Sharia is a kind of constitution system. You can select the leader, but you can't change these fundamental laws which guarantee rights and justice, even if the majority are so. And someone asked me, how do Muslims guarantee the minority rights of non-Muslims in our countries? Quite simply, we're not democratic. So the majority of us will not oppress the minority because we can't, even if we wanted to. Yeah, if the system is Islamic and under Sharia. Now, as for the ruler, obviously, as Plato also noticed, that the most efficient ruling system is obviously one man. However, he does not have infinite or unlimited power. He is under the law. In the Islamic system, there'll be a number of ways of basically controlling the ruler. One will be public opinion. Other will be scholars' fatwa, and scholars being independent of the leader. But most importantly would be the highest kind of judge called the Qadi al-Madalim, the judge of unjust acts. And he could summon the Caliph to court, and the Caliph, once he's summoned by the Qadi, he loses all his powers, or is suspended while he's under investigation. And if the investigation concludes that he's done something wrong, he can be removed of power, punished by the Shariah if he's broken the law as an individual man, or punished as a leader and removed from power, and so on. So this is clear checks and balances which happen. For example, the Ottoman Sultan Abdul Hamid, to quote the most recent example, was kicked out of power by the fatwa of the top scholar, what's called the Sheikh of Islam. He was, by a fatwa decree from this scholar, he was removed from, the Caliph was removed from power. This is accountability that you have. Whereas, if in the West, you don't have presidents which are accountable to such degree. Maybe when they finish their term, then they have these Hutton inquiries and all these inquiries that come on much afterwards, and then they might prosecute them after they finish their term. But you get a fixed term in democracy, which the leader can do virtually anything he wants, only limited by a constitution if you're lucky enough to have one, or statute. But in some countries, like you can overrule this, like in Weimar Republic of Germany, when Hitler's party overruled their constitution by emergency laws, which, funnily enough, most of the Muslim world did. The dictators did this. Did you know that all Muslim countries currently under dictators started off as democracies? Did you know this? Yeah, Egypt started democracy, Tunisia, democracy. All these places started off as democracies. Yeah, but they became dictators. And as the Romans and the Greeks observed, over time, eventually, all democracy will become a dictatorship. It just depends on length of time and so on, to when this will come about.
Well, one last question, depending on how brief.
I'll keep it very brief.
Yes.
Do you think that, in light of all that you've said about different leaders around the world, I think if we're honest, every country we see corruption in society, right? So do you think that a set of laws can, if it's enforced by human beings who are fallible and weak and prone to selfish acts themselves, can that really change the human heart and therefore change society? Or we just, we're trying to please a holy and pure and perfect God, then it's bound to fall flat. We need to have our hearts changed, not just have rules, more rules. You can add more rules, like our last government kept adding rules, but it didn't improve society.
Sure. Well, as the Quran says, Allah does not change the situation of people until they change what is within themselves. So the Quran says this. I would actually say that the real source of all these problems in the Muslim world, and I'm going to be honest about this, is not really these dictators or post-colonial powers. It's us. We allow it. We've tolerated it. We decided that it was not convenient for our lives to go against these dictators many years before. Only now, when we've lost so much, we're so poor that there's no other choice now. Islam is only as strong, like any other ideological civilization, civilization based on an idea or an ideal, that is only as strong as the people's understanding of it is. So in Weimar Republic, people believing in freedom totally supported the Nazis, thinking that Nazis were just giving freedom to the German people. You see? They didn't see a contradiction. And now you're seeing that liberalism, and I've been attacking liberalism a lot today, but, just a bit, but today, the people who are attacking it the most aren't Muslims, or aren't Christians or Jews. People attacking it the most today are people who used to believe in it in this country. They're becoming right-wing nationalists. They're rejecting liberalism, saying, forget multiculturalism, it's dead. We need to implement a one law for all, one culture for all, and English values, whatever that means. How is that defined? Yeah, from now to eternity, like it's some kind of holy book of English values that have always existed, and must be revealed to David Cameron or something. Yeah. So in this sense, in this sense, we have to, as Muslims, it's our obligation now to understand our belief. And my talk is mostly for, I'll even say, mostly for the Muslims in the audience, not just the non-Muslims. But you have to understand our beliefs and call for it and work for it. Otherwise, you will get no change to our situation. And you have to really evaluate, what is your real purpose in life? Is it just about selfishness, like liberalism advocates? Or is it about your first and primary duty to the Creator who made all of us and obliged us to take care of each other, Muslims and non-Muslims alike?
Okay.